Good afternoon.
Hello.
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 How are you all?
Doing well. How about yourself?
Okay. Elsa, I think I just saw you in the hallway.
Oh,
Like
did
you,
you?
yeah, you ran past me and Scott. I was
Oh,
I was sitting next to my TA, so you probably didn't notice it.
oh, like on the where the stairs up in the lobby.
Yeah, you came up the stairs.
Oh, I'm sorry I missed you.
That's okay. We're deep in a conversation about why no students ever come to office hours.
Yeah, I'm usually in my head at that time because I just finished my class on Monday, Wednesday, Friday.
Yeah, you teach at the same time I do then? Or
11, 12. I teach it.
yeah, I didn't realize we're at the same time.
Yeah.
I
Yeah, and
always
I'm
just
like,
take it to mean my class is too easy when students never come to office hours.
I'm explaining it perfectly.
Exactly, right?
It's one of those extremes. No.
Not so, not so. Okay, everyone, I guess we can get started. Um, yeah, I'll say mom. It's fine. We're all squeezing it in. You may also see me consuming. Um, yeah, so I threw out a prompt that Will had shared, and I don't know if Will's kind of transitioning out, so he may not ever get to hear the fruits of his prompt. But his question was one small win not in your work life. Um, so I thought that was kind of cool. And let's see, I'll pick people. Uh, Erika, I'll pick you first since you're presenting. And Danny, I'm gonna forget people again. Christian, and then me, and then Paul, I, and then Allison, Whitney. Who did I miss? That's it. That's it for now. So we'll start with you, Erica.
Yeah, I guess my exciting one is that this month I finally paid off my car payment after 6 years, so that was exciting. Yeah, so that's my victory.
That's a nice feeling.
Okay, mine for this month um, is I started some plants and they're finally doing the thing, which is exciting. And there was a little bit of a scare because they got too dry. You can see they look a little shriveled and sad, but now they've started to come back. So that's my small win.
Okay, yeah, next. Last week, I think it was last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, finally got the rest of our 6 foot privacy fence in place. Took me 7 years from the first section to us getting all of the neighbors on board to do the final sections. So that's pretty exciting.
Wow.
That's amazing. That must feel really nice. Okay, well, I put this prompt out yesterday, and then today is like I feel like the least winningest day. Um, but I will share that I started learning about 3D printing. Um, and so that's not my win though. My win is like actually I've added a bunch of stuff in my life and now I'm just feeling it. But my win is that like I thought I was either gonna drop it and like never do it, um, even if I have a printer at hand, or it was going to take over my life and I would drop other things. And I managed to thread the needle so that it is not doing.
Wow.
All right. So, yeah, I saw this prompt yesterday and I've been like, okay, what would I classify as a non-work related win? Um, and haven't really been sure. So I'm going to say something that's just really small, but I couldn't think of anything else. So it's kind of the only thing that came up at all is that for a couple years, I've been doing Pilates, and I think it's been helpful in balance and some strength and stuff like that. And I did my 100th class, which means they give you a pair of socks, the grippy socks, and they were gray camouflage, which is a little bit weird, but
I like it.
so I'll go with that.
My win is I successfully negotiated with my landlord not to increase my rent this year. So, yeah, San Francisco downtown, that's a big win.
Mhm.
I can't afford to pay 500 more
Holy cow.
every month.
That's a hard one to follow, Pi. That's pretty amazing. I didn't read it in advance, so I'm just thinking right now. Partially because Whitney and I've talked. I was so thrilled when I learned about how much Whitney likes the deadlift. Mine isn't a deadlift, but I stumbled into a back squat PR because I can't do math very well. Uh, I put 205 pounds on the bar instead of 180 or 185. So, and then I was like, wow, this is way heavier than I expected. I just must not be coming back very strong. But then I redid the math and I was pretty pleased at 205. So, that's Risa wins.
Amazing.
I was like, I need to keep doing bad math because it like in my head, I thought it would be easier. So I think if I had thought it was the weight it was, I wouldn't have even tried.
Yep,
Interesting what your brain will do.
completely. So have you adjusted your baseline?
Yes,
Like
I
your
did.
80% effort
Yeah,
now?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. Well, it also is like now I need to work on my deadlift because
Yeah,
it's way
even it
behind.
up.
Yeah.
Let's see. I don't have an exercise related win, although now I feel like I should, Allison. I'm going to the gym later today, so we'll
Okay, you
see.
can let
But
me know.
my win is that my 15-year-old now has enough driving hours that she can get her license. So she's not eligible until July 14th. So everything from here on out is just bonus. And I think I would feel safest with her on the road alone with like 100 hours and they only require 50. I mean, she's a good driver. Just 50 hours of driving is not actually that much. So we're trying to get as close to 100 as we can, but we'll see how far we get in the next few months. But she's doing good and could go take her test today if she had been holding her license for she has to be 16, but they have to hold it for a full year even after they get their hours. So yeah, you have like four. I know. I know. So that's a pretty big win as her driving instructor.
Good job.
Yeah.
Well, those were awesome. I can't work my buttons here. That's so great. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your wins. Those are really, really good. And I feel like somehow I feel lighter now. I'm trying to manipulate the screen so that I can allow Erica to share. They've changed the versions lately, and now, yes. Oh, Erica, you just asked me, and then I can make it work. Erica's going to talk to us for the rest of the time. So take it away.
All right, let me get my screens oriented. All right, am I sharing my PowerPoint? I think I am. Excellent. All right, so this isn't necessarily a Sapphires project, but it is Sapphires adjacent, in that you all inspired me to think about air quality in the transportation space. And Dr. Paglioni and I went after a very small grant from CTIPS, which, if you're not familiar with CTIPS, it's run basically out of the civil engineering department through the University, I think, of South Dakota, and it's a university transportation consortium. So they give a little bit of money every year, basically just to fund a grad student. So that's what this project is about. And so in this project, we were interested in looking at resuspension emissions from vehicles. So I'll walk you through a little bit about background, why that's interesting, and then maybe get to, like, the actual data we collected and what results we found. This also helped me because we're preparing to write the journal paper for this, so this, made me dig a little bit deeper into the data. So I think I'll be able to, help my student write a better journal paper as a result. All right, and first, also, I just wanted to give credit where credit is definitely due on this. So Chandler Young was my master's student who did the work on this. He, collected all the data and analyzed all the data. So just because I'm presenting this, please know that it really is his work. And then Vinny Paglioni, if you're not familiar who he is, he's an assistant professor in systems engineering, and he's actually the PI on this CTIPS grant that we got. And then also recognized Christian was very helpful in listening to some of our insane ideas and just made sure we weren't offending, air quality research from before us. So appreciate Christian's time listening to us and making sure we had a good experimental design. All right, so just a little bit of background to set the scene why this is interesting and on the radar of policymakers is probably no shock to you all, but vehicles have becoming much more efficient. And so as a result, a lot of jurisdictions have been trying to understand how to recapture budget for transportation infrastructure, because the historical way that we funded infrastructure was through the gas tax. And now, vehicles aren't necessarily contributing much to the gas tax. I think in the state of Colorado, 26 cents for every gallon you buy goes towards the gas tax. And at the same time, vehicles are getting more efficient. And so, in addition to infrastructure, funding also to offset the effects of emissions and make sure vehicles are paying their part. Non-tailpipe emissions has emerged as, really what is perhaps the concern for emissions generation in the transportation area. And so again, policy has increasingly started to focus on user-based impact pricing. So I mentioned historically we have the gas tax. This isn't sustainable given, how fuel efficient vehicles are, and they're not contributing much, especially since electric vehicles don't pay the gas tax at all. And so we have huge inequities in how, who's paying for the infrastructure, as well as, people who can't necessarily afford to buy a newer vehicle end up paying more, which is unfair. And so, shifting has gone to tolling and high occupancy toll hot lanes. I did some work with CDOT a couple years ago to look at road usage charges. So basically every year when you get your odometer checked for an emissions check, for example, I think they do that every couple years, you would also record how many miles you drove, and then you'd get a fee based on how many miles you drove that year. They didn't implement it, but it's, a potential direction in the future. I also worked with CDOT to look at how we could implement rideshare fees for the state. The idea is that rideshare companies like Uber and Lyft are just driving around aimlessly, waiting until someone calls one of them. And so they're contributing, to congestion and also emissions as well. And then perhaps unfortunately, my most impactful research product for the state has been the retail delivery fee, which is that 28-cent fee you get charged every time you purchase something online. And that again is to try to offset the, induced congestion and emissions and safety implications that result from this added traffic on the road that isn't necessarily paying their part. And so all of this is to say, really, the underlying current here is that electric vehicles exist and they're heavier, and there's some studies that were conducted in the 1970s that were like, it really comes down to weight, and weight leads to higher emissions and higher, non-tailpipe emissions. And so electric vehicles should be penalized as a result. And so we were interested in pushing on this statement and understanding if this was a fair assessment to be made. And so the objective ultimately we sought to seek out is to understand how roadway operations and vehicle aerodynamic characteristics affect resuspension emissions. And so we're really looking at, what gets kicked up from the pavement, the tires, the brake, etc., from these vehicles. And so that was the motivation here, with again some policymakers focused on taxing vehicles based on their weight, and that would specifically, two vehicles that are otherwise identical, but one's battery electric and one is internal combustion, would get charged more because it's battery electric. And we wanted to see if that was a fair, policy implementation. So that was the motivation for this study. And so a little bit to understand how we collected some of this data before we dive into the data is we used some air quality monitoring devices. We used the Sensirion Sen 5X, and that allowed us to capture PM 2.5 and PM 10. We did a little bit of development here. We connected our Sensirion to an Arduino. We used a real-time clock module so that we could collect timestamps. That allowed us to synchronize all of our data. We attached a micro SD card so we could actually store the data, and then we powered all this with a 9-volt battery so that we could go out remotely and collect this data on the vehicles without having to have it plugged into a wall. We also use this app called Sensor Log. It's a smartphone app, and basically you press start and it logs your GPS location. It uses your phone's accelerometer to collect accelerometer data, and from that, speed data also. So we were able to cross-reference all of this data using timestamps. So a little bit of background about, what the data looked like and why we were interested in collecting this. So this was largely, a lot of trial and error, and I emphasize error because we learned a lot about what doesn't work for our equipment. I'm not going to walk you through all of our failed tests, but I'm going to walk you through a couple of them just so you understand how we landed on the experimental design that we did. So basically, we originally thought, what a great idea if we, mark out a box on the ground that's like a 10 by 5-foot rectangle. We blow it completely dry as much as we can of debris and sweep all the debris out. We go measure how much debris is fairly common on a road. We redisperse that into this, square. We drive over it with different vehicles at different speeds, different weighting conditions, different tires, etc. And we measure on the side of the road, right? If someone was walking on the sidewalk at kind of their respiratory, shoulder level, what air quality level they're exposed to. We thought this was a really great experimental design. And we went out and we tested this a bunch of times, and we realized that our data was just complete noise, and it was really hard to identify vehicle-specific trends. It just kind of all turned into blobs of data for a variety of reasons. And so we had to pivot a little bit, and we realized the equipment we had in our experimental design that we had really didn't make for collecting roadside infrastructure air quality testing. And again, because we were really interested in the vehicle, right? Like vehicle weight, vehicle design, vehicle operating characteristics. So we pivoted a little bit and put our air quality sensors onto the vehicles that we were testing. So you can see a couple of pictures here. Basically, we created 4 of these modules. We bought like Tupperware containers and contained them in these Tupperware containers. And then we attached suction cups, like GoPro suction cups that could be used on a vehicle. We duct taped them all together. And then we mounted them on our vehicles so that they were modular so that we could swap them between all the different test vehicles. We also tried to find a way that we could have comparable measurements across vehicles. Even vehicles are vastly different. So we wanted, if we were collecting on a Nissan Leaf, to get a similar location on, a Ford pickup truck, for example. So we ended up equipping 4 of these sensors, one on the front bumper, so you can see that in the bottom left picture, one on the rear bumper. I don't know if I have a good shot of that. One right above the front tire, and then one right above the rear tire to try to capture, what's happening in front of the vehicle, what's happening behind the vehicle, and then what's happening right at those tire locations, which is causing the, in theory, the resuspension emissions to occur. So after we really finalized what our experimental design was, we really honed in on our research questions. And so the questions that we sought to answer here was, how does sensor location influence the measured particulate matter concentrations around a vehicle? How does vehicle weight, speed, and road surface type affect the particulate resuspension emissions? And then the last question is, how do aerodynamic differences between vehicles influence particulate resuspension? And so right in the perfect world, we could have had a vehicle that we could have adjusted the ride height on, for example, or we could have adjusted the wheel, the tire width or the tire tread, or the undersurface carriage area while keeping all other aspects constant. CTIPS didn't give us funding for that, of course. We didn't have a modular vehicle design, but we were trying to at least lay some groundwork that could create future studies for people to explore those in more depth and understand how they might go about doing that. And you can see a good example here of Vinny. We put the instrumentation on his vehicle and realized his passenger door wouldn't open, so he had to climb through the window of his car, which was a good time. We had a lot of fun with doing this data collection last summer. All right, so let's talk a little bit, about the independent variables we had for this study to try to address the research questions. So we had a 2 by 2 by 2 by 5 by 4 mixed factorial design, which I know sounds like a lot, but not all of these are, within and between subject designs. But basically, we looked at 2 different road surface types. We wanted to look at the 2 extremes, a paved road and a gravel road. Now, of course, we could have made that even more finite, right? But we wanted to at least look at those 2 levels. And again, opportunity for future research here, which is, perhaps one reason why I'm sharing it with this group. I think, if anyone wants to continue this, I would happy to share lessons learned in this adventure. We also looked at speed. We wanted to look at how 30 miles per hour versus 50 miles per hour affected the resuspension emissions. We looked at vehicle weight. This was perhaps limited, but we looked at the base. So every single vehicle drove this route at these 2 different speeds at their base weight. And then we added 624 pounds, which I know sounds a little bit random. But it is roughly the amount that, 3 passengers or 2 passengers and significant cargo would add. It also is the amount of weight that my grad student was able to find by taking buckets from Home Depot and filling them with rocks and putting them inside of vehicles. So again, this was a low budget project that we were working with. And then we also looked at vehicle type. So we had 5 different vehicles and we tried to capture different types of vehicles. So we have a Ford Mustang, which internal combustion engine, a sedan. We have a Nissan Leaf, which is an electric vehicle. It's a compact, that should say SUV. Apologize for that. We had a Tesla Model Y, which is also an electric vehicle, a little larger midsize SUV. We had a Jeep Wrangler, which in this case we used a plug-in hybrid, which represents a midsize SUV also. And then we used a Ford F-250, which is also an internal combustion vehicle, represents a truck, and it represents a little bit heavier of a truck, right? It's bigger than a 150, for example. So again, a lot of opportunities. We could have done more vehicles, but this at least gave us a space to look at a couple of different types of vehicles and different designs. Some data collection data here. So we drove these vehicles each on the 2 roads that I have highlighted here. So Vine Drive, just east of I-25. We picked that road because it gets traffic, so it's realistic loading of debris on a roadway. but it is at least, not heavy traffic so that my student could go out and collect this data and, not cause a traffic jam going slower than the speed limit, for example. Then we also did County Road 56, which is just north of there, trying to get two roads that are, close proximity to each other. This is a gravel road. This is the road that is outside of the CSU like Ag Research Center. So it's also a low volume road, so we didn't have to worry about traffic. The goal was to do data collection when there wasn't another vehicle picking up resuspension emissions also while we were going on these roads. We only did testing when it was low wind conditions and when it was dry, so there had been no rain in the previous 48 hours. I think we did testing over a 2-week period as time permitted. Each condition, so there was 40 different conditions, right? 5 vehicles, 2 speeds, 2 road types, and 2 weight conditions were conducted across multiple passes. So I think we drove each road 5 to 10 times, depending. And then that data was segmented into 30-second continuous trials. And then 10 of those trials were randomly selected per condition. So basically, for County Road 56 at 30 miles per hour with base loading for the Tesla, we had 10 of those 30-second segments of data. And all of that fed into our ANOVAs and then our Tukey on our significant difference tests. And this is one limitation, I think. This was a master's project or master's thesis. And so, we didn't necessarily get into, more complex analytical approaches, but that's the next phase of this data analysis is to do some time series modeling with the data, maybe some machine learning that can get at some of these more nuanced changes in the data that we see. But given that, we still got some super interesting, cool results. So let's talk through a couple of those. So the first one is that we were interested in understanding how sensor location measured and picked up different resuspension emissions. And so doing an ANOVA, we saw that in fact sensor location was statistically significant. And when we look at the Tukey test, which I didn't put here because I didn't think that was super interesting to show you all, the back bumper was consistently the highest in terms of PM 2.5 and PM 10 readings, and the front bumper was consistently the lowest across all testing conditions and across all vehicles. And so on our subsequent analysis, we chose to look at back bumper conditions just so that we weren't doing, hundreds of ANOVAs, but also this represents, kind of that worst case scenario. And we thought that that could be telling to see the differences between these different factors. Let's see. Yeah, and perhaps also not super surprising that back bumper is really picking up a lot of the PM10. We see a big increase in that. Perhaps we don't see as big of an increase, the difference between 2.5 and 10 between those front bumper readings. So then we also, right, we're interested in the road surface, so did an ANOVA on that, and we saw, of course, as you all probably would expect, road surface had a significant impact in that specifically the gravel road was, leading to much larger values of, degradations in air quality compared to the paved road driving. And you can, again, really see this pronounced in the PM10. So maybe I didn't explain these graphs too well, but we see, right, PM 2.5 on the left and PM 10 on the right. And so, the difference between, the paved and the gravel road for PM 2.5 is significant, but we see even more of a jump in those PM 10 values between those two conditions. So, again, both were significant and both were, concerning for terms of, the number of gravel roads that we see, especially in some of the rural areas around Colorado. We also looked at speed. So this is showing the difference between 30 miles per hour and 50 miles per hour. And so again, we see in the ANOVA that speed had a significant effect, where higher speeds, again, we only measured 50 versus 30, but the higher speed led to, higher concentrations of these PM 2.5 and 10 values. We also, of course, looked at weight, and this was interesting. Right, remember this was the, motivation for doing this research is should electric vehicles be penalized because they weigh more? And now, of course, we only had 624 pounds of difference, but we see that there was no significant effect when we add weight to a vehicle, that we really don't see any increase in the PM 2.5 or PM 10 values. Right, again, future work should definitely, load up the vehicle with a lot more weight than 624 pounds, but at least, if we're thinking in terms of design changes at this level of difference or passenger occupancy levels, not seeing a big difference in those resuspension emissions. And then the last, slide I'll show you and bore you with the results for is the vehicle type. And this also, gets at this idea of different vehicle designs. Oh, yeah, see that. Good question, Tammy. Yeah, so you probably said, but what's the average difference in ICE V and EV? Yeah, that's a really good question. In my student's version of this slide deck, he had a very nice table of what the curb weight of every vehicle was, and I can pull that up perhaps after this because it's pretty easy to grab from my desktop. I think I would be hypothesizing right now if I tried to think of what those numbers were off the top of my head. But I think the vehicles that we picked are EVs weren't necessarily the heaviest vehicles, right? Because we had that Ford 250 truck. But yeah, good question. I'll look at that. But perhaps this also shows this point where there really wasn't actually a significant difference between our vehicles in terms of what PM 2.5 and PM 10 levels we were measuring. This plot is a little misleading because the plot is just the average values, not necessarily controlling for the external variables like the ANOVA does. But we saw that there really wasn't a significant difference, right? So the sedan wasn't picking up different, resuspension emissions as the truck versus the Tesla, etc., at least for the, conditions and the vehicles that we looked at. Which again speaks that perhaps it's, not primarily driven by the vehicle design, but maybe it's more about the roadway operating conditions that has the biggest effect on what the, resuspension emissions look like. So to wrap that up, some of the key findings we found in this work is that resuspension emissions appear to be wake dominated. And by that, I mean our rear bumper measurements, observed the largest values for our PM 2.5 and 10. So, doing a study where you only capture front bumper PM might not necessarily capture, what a vehicle picks up. It also, is picking up that worst case scenario across all the vehicles we tested. And so, it isn't necessarily indicative of, what people on the side of the road are breathing in, but it gets you closer to that perhaps. We also saw that road surface is really the dominant factor, right? So gravel roads are much worse than paved roads. And so that perhaps suggests that, there is benefit in focusing road maintenance on those gravel roads, right? So dust control, spraying down roads, clearly has a benefit there. Doing some sort of surface treatment on those gravel roads would pay dividends. Again, under operating, speed increases the resuspension emissions, and so thinking about, speed management strategies could also have an impact here. And again, at least for what we measured, vehicle and weight really did not have a significant effect on our resuspension emissions. Again, we only measured 5 vehicles and we only compared the difference between 624 pounds. But the fact that, the vehicles that were a wide range of different weights, also in different types of, ride height and undercarriage surface area didn't lead to, noticeable changes, perhaps again, suggests that it's, more about roadway operations that could see the, the benefits in policy as opposed to, taxing vehicles because they're heavy because the study from 1970 said that was the case. So that is what I had. I appreciate you guys listening to that. I'd be happy to hear anyone's reactions or thoughts. I think Christian shared a bunch of thoughts with us earlier this week when my student defended, and it gave us a lot of really good ideas. And, so, again, would appreciate anything, lessons learned that we could, add to future studies or data analysis ideas. So, yeah, I know I went through that pretty fast, but yeah.
Well, I have a question. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Paul.
So you said that like maintenance of the gravel roads would be good. What about just paving them? Would it be better to pave them than maintain them for like spraying them down, or is that just
Yeah.
so energy intensive to pave it better to not do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that could be a whole trade-off analysis and life cycle costs of gravel versus paved. But especially in a, year that we're gonna, have a, severe drought restrictions and, don't think it's gonna get better moving forward. Perhaps that is the long-term strategy. Yeah, I didn't want to, go out and say that we should pave all the gravel roads. That might not be realistic, but yeah, probably that's the solution.
I know that some people also treat gravel roads with produced water from oil and gas, which is like a whole nother can of worms that you open if you treat with produced water. Mess.
That's actually super interesting. Like that would be another good follow-on study is what you treat the roads with and how that adds to the problem.
Erica, I had a question. I was curious, did you all control for anything like tire width or type? Because I know that like for a while with EVs, there were like two tires they could buy because they needed like the giant tires, right?
Yeah, we did not. So originally, when we were doing the infrastructure version of this study, where we were just going to mount something on the side of the road and drive past it, we originally were on a quest to recruit 50 different vehicles, and we were going to, measure their tire width and their tire tread. And then we had a shift for a variety of reasons, the experimental design. So we did not control for that, but we would love to in future versions of this. It just started to get out of hand because there, yeah, are so many aspects of the vehicle that, we have to control. Like in the perfect world, we'd get one of those vehicles that's like, just a flat body basically. We can change out the wheels and we can add weight to it and add like, undercarriage area and completely modify it. Yeah.
Yeah, you need to make your own vehicle in that case. Okay, I have two questions. One is about that road, the road question.
Yeah.
So yes, unpaved roads are definitely worse, but what is the like road miles driven compared between paved and unpaved? And also how near are they um to population? So like I would guess that the net exposure from unpaved roads is still quite a bit less, but that's just a guess. And then I have a second question after that.
Yeah. So in terms of the first question, the net miles driven, you mean for us or in the world of gravel
No, in the
roads?
world, in the world
Yeah.
of roads, like in
Yeah.
Colorado, how many vehicle miles are driven on paved versus unpaved? And then what and and then like
Yeah.
the,
I
you'd have to
gotcha.
do a whole study to get this, but the unpaved roads are farther from population centers. So I don't want to say that the rural people are less important, but there's fewer of them and there's density, like less density. So the overall health impact might be much smaller, even if the emissions are greater per vehicle.
No. Yeah, those are really good points. I think the vehicle miles traveled in, the world or in Colorado, yeah, definitely are more on paved. But like to add kind of to my point that I'll make after the, who's exposed aspect, right? We were driving on, County Road 56 in this example, and it was houses immediately adjacent to this road, right? We were driving past people's mailboxes, their fence lines, their houses were right there. And so, like, yeah, I like the total number of people affected, yes, is definitely lower. But like, it makes me think when I bought my house, for example, there's a cement or concrete factory like right behind my house. And we had to sign a disclosure that, we were willing to live this close to, the factory and it could have health implications. And so like, at least people being aware of what they're being exposed to, could be benefit. Even if, unfortunately, the funding doesn't allow for all those roads to get treated or to get paved, at least people know what they're exposed to, and they can maybe make the choice to spray it down or take action if they're concerned. But yeah, I like that perspective a lot. Thinking about that side of it. And then maybe Tammy, really fast to answer your previous question.
Oh, wait. No, I had even another one. Yeah, don't. Yeah.
So I was
Do I
just
get
gonna.
another one, or maybe somebody else should go, and then I'll ask the other one later.
No, I think you can for sure. But just to answer your previous question, I think I'm sharing my screen again. All right. So you see the tr ICE vehicle is 6,000 pounds, whereas the Nissan Leaf was and the Tesla were both 4,000 pounds. The Jeep Wrangler was five. So like our electric vehicles weren't the heaviest in this data set. Which also, suggests that, electric vehicles, modern day electric vehicles aren't necessarily as heavy perhaps as people think they might be, on the roads.
Yeah, so my other question was just the difference between the studies from the 70s that you drew your inspiration from, like where they did find weight and then you did not find weight as a significant variable. So do you think it was a difference in like how many vehicles or how you did the study, or are the two studies just so different that you can't compare them? But it seems like people could look at that and then use that to justify a weight penalty, whereas your results don't support that. So how do you reconcile those?
Yeah, I think it's the different experimental designs, and people have just latched on to that study. There's this one specific study in the 70s, and I should have like grabbed it. Um, but like this was the way this study came about is that Vinny and I were standing in the systems engineering office cluster and we were just chatting about, the CTIPS call and we're like, oh, what could we do for it? And then Tom like walked out of his office in a huff and, was talking about how he'd just been on a TRB, which is the Transportation Research Board, like webinar. And they said that, there's a study in the 70s that was conducted that said weight is what causes resuspension emissions. And, there's a bunch of different state DOTs that have been utilizing that to try to think of policy to tax electric vehicles as a result because they weigh so much. And he was like, that, study is complete garbage. They need to do an updated study. And Vinny and I were like, oh, tell us more. We want to put in a, proposal for C-tips. Can we steal this? And then I was like, and I know a little bit about air quality thanks to SAPPHIRES. So we could, really make something happen here. And basically, that study in the 70s was, I think they tested 8 vehicles and they tested like a couple of sedans and then a heavy, like, commercial truck. And they were like, oh, look how terrible the commercial truck is. I'm like, yeah, of course. So I think that one was not the best experimental design, but it, is available and out there. And so people have latched onto it from a, policy standpoint because perhaps they don't understand, the rigor of, design of experiments. So I guess also the lesson here is like standing in your office cluster and eavesdropping on other people's conversations can lead to getting funding for a grad student.
So I find myself wondering, this is not really a question for you, Erica, but it's just a kind of, I don't know, for this group. The whole idea of sapphires is protect from bad outdoor air. Do we have a way in which we could conceive that our system would trigger every time somebody drives by on a dirt road, a gravel road? If you're one of those houses that has the mailbox right on Route 56.
I like that. Yeah, just put a little sensor out there when a car drives by and protect you from it. Tell you to, yeah, just automatically shut all your windows at the, at the minimum. one, like the neighbor, like the mailbox three like doors down from you detects it, like do some mitigation. I like that.
Well, and that's why I'd like to think of it from a systematic perspective. Like, yes, you could be exposed, like those gravel roads can get very dusty. You can clearly see when vehicles have traveled on them, right? And yet if you're in a dusty area, is that the major source of exposure? What would your system actually respond to if you're out there? And then since they're coarse particles, right, the behavior is quite different from the smoke particles we've been thinking of.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And like the other aspect, right, is that speed was significant. So maybe there's, a case to be made about reducing speeds on some of those gravel roads. And that could have an impact and a benefit.
I think the lesson is that the car behind them needs the pressurization system.
Mm, that we should do that for our next study.
Christian, it sounds like you had a chance to air all your critiques and thoughts, but did you have anything you would share with this group?
Yeah, I thought it was really good. I think we came up with some good brainstorming ideas of where we could take it. And I don't know why my camera's off, sorry. One of the ones that like I was very surprised by the weight. Um, I believe based on those results, but I've been thinking a lot like I wonder how much effort or what the steps would be to change that preconception, right? Because there is so much history there that heavy vehicles kick up more, at least from a assumption standpoint. How do you design a study to show that reasonably? Because you're coming from behind the ball, I think, in terms of convincing folks. So that's what I've been thinking about for the last 24 hours since I saw the student's defense. I think it could be done, but I think everyone's going to be a skeptic. Like, you just want the EVs to look good. So that's what I'm thinking about. We talked about we need the supercar. We can just like change everything on, but that's like $1 million grant instead of a little pilot one that Erika got to do this so far. So
Yeah, I too am skeptical of our, weight results. I think the fact that the vehicle was not significant gives me more reassurance. It's like 624 pounds isn't a ton of weight. But yeah, I would love to repeat this study again and really focus on the weight aspect, and try to standardize more vehicles or get more vehicles. So perhaps that'll be in the future, and then I'll, encourage you all to participate and let me use your vehicle for testing.
So
I was also wondering sorry, let me cut you off, Timmy, how we deal with the noise and the short spikes you saw on the side of the road, because I think that would be a really valuable one to show like what's the impact of the vehicle going past somebody standing there. And I don't think you did anything wrong. I think these are just really short events for these large particles. And how do we do large particles fast sampling? Those two things aren't an easy problem to address. So
yeah, I was one. So I didn't. I'm sure you said this, but did you have duplicates in there, and do you understand how variable those measurements are in the first place? Because my reaction was similar to yours. I think that it was the between vehicle results that were more convincing than that adding 600 pounds.
Yeah.
And it could be that the variability is just so high that you're not going to see any effective weight. In which case, you can argue that yeah, there might be an effective weight, but it's invisible. It's going to be invisible in the noise, and therefore a similar uh, size or capacity EV shouldn't be penalized. Um, and so I think before anything else, I would try to get a handle on the variability.
Yeah, I think 100%. Like maybe our truck was really heavy, but it also had high clearance between the road and the bumper, and so maybe that counter affected the weight. Yeah, definitely. I think for sure we want to be weary of, we don't want our study to be misused like the one from the 70s is being misused. But I think at least like hopefully it motivates people to, try to replicate this study and control some of those variables that we had trouble controlling. I also have all this equipment sitting in my office, so if anyone has a student that wants to go do a lot of driving this summer, I'd be happy to, share the equipment. This earlier today, Pi and I had our meeting, and he was asking me what I was presenting about. And then, good driver behavior fashion, he was like, "Well, what if you had a risky driver versus a calm driver versus, gender differences between driver behaviors?" And so I liked that perspective as well, like how we had the same person do all of our drives. So hopefully we got rid of that variability, but there definitely could be some influences of driving style also.
Well, yeah, and the exhaust emissions, it's pretty well known that aggressive driving has higher emissions.
Yeah. Exactly, right? I
So,
think
so
about
we
when
could, we should put a tax on people who are aggressive drivers. Good
I
luck
like
with that one, Erika.
Yeah, that's good. No, cool. Yeah, I appreciate everyone's comments on this. Paul, I saw you came off mute. Was there something you wanted to say?
No, I was going to make a joke, but I'm going to just withhold it.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much. Have a great weekend. Enjoy your wins.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.